This Fleet Equipment Unscripted interview is presented by Hendrickson, a leading manufacturer of heavy-duty suspension systems and components to the global commercial transportation industry. Visit hendrickson-intl.com to learn more.
Hi everyone, I'm Jason Morgan, Content Director for Fleet Equipment, and welcome to Fleet Equipment Unscripted. Today we're talking with Nick Pittinger, Director of Data Services at Decisiv. Nick, great to see you again.
Great to see you again. It's coming a common theme here.
I know, one of my favorite conversations I always have. You are very gracious and bring us some exclusive truck service data here. We've been doing this the past couple quarters. We are up to Q4 of last year and tracking those trends. So let's kick it off. Can you give us a rundown of the big truck service shifts from Q4 last year?
Sure thing. So what we've been seeing in the data was that the number of service transactions continued to rise. So for Q4 2023, those transaction volumes rose by 2.6%. And that's, double what was there for Q3, where we were up 1.3% quarter over quarter. When we look at those volumes year over year, Q4 was up 13.1%. So definitely operations are on a rise. Some of that growth can definitely be attributed to the growth of our ecosystem. But we think the bulk increase represents significant growth in just service activity in general. People getting their trucks in for service, making sure that they're, road ready and, not having major problems. When I look at some of the top 5 service activity between 2022 and 2023, the top 5 hasn't changed, which was a real interesting finding there. There's been a slight decrease in some of them, little changes here and there, but, the top 5 in both years were power plant, exhaust, cabin sheet metal, brakes, and cooling system in basically that order, all with roughly the same percentages happening of the operations. Power plant in that 20% range for Q4, exhaust and cabin sheet metal at around 11% of the operations happening, and then brakes at 7%, cooling at 6%. All of those were consistent when we look at the same kind of period at the end of 22.
Right, for sure. And, so I want to dive into some of those things. First, though, going into Q4, right, we think colder weather, you're getting in the fall, you're getting in the winter. Do you expect any seasonal issues to affect service activity? Anything stand out to you in this quarter?
We definitely see some seasonal activity going on in there, mainly around the things that we've talked about a little bit in the past with regards to air conditioning, heating, and ventilating systems. Q2, Q3, we see those things having an uptick from a seasonal perspective. Well, in Q4, there was a steady decline of that where, that AC, heating, and ventilating system related work was down 40.2%. Huge dip. And that's kind of expected. As the winter season comes around, people aren't worried about, the trucks and their AC as much. So, the work on that is slowing down here at later portions of the year. Another one we saw was there's an increase in transactions for the cooling system service. So that's cooling system of the truck itself, not necessarily of the cab, where, with cooling system, that one seems to be like on a steady rise towards the end of the year. So when we look at quarter over quarter changes for cooling, in Q1, it was 0% flat. Q2, it was down 7%. Q3, up 3%. But in Q4, it is up drastically at 16% higher than the previous quarter. So we found that was relatively interesting.
Yeah, and I know the one you mentioned too, cab and sheet metal, which always interests me and perplexes me, especially given, the bracket you have of 1 to 3 years. You'd think newer trucks, especially with advanced safety systems, wouldn't need that much body work. Do you have any insight into what might be going on there?
You're definitely correct. Cabin sheet metal has been an interesting one. It's been like the topmost activity in that 0 to 3 year interval when we look at the age of the trucks and the type of work that they're coming in for. Like the assumption there is that with the newer trucks, people are, kind of taking care of those cab repairs, whether some of that is under warranty, whether some of it is like just making sure that they have a good pristine truck in those early years. We just feel like those folks are, taking care of those vehicles a little bit more versus, later on in the life cycle. Again, the focus has been shifting more towards what do we do to keep that truck on the road, focusing on, engines, exhausts, brakes, etc., versus the dents and things that are happening out there. When we do look at that cabin sheet metal, as you mentioned, it is the number one operation in that 0 to 3 age bucket category, with around 19% of the operations that are happening are in that cabin sheet metal category. But then that decreases greatly when you start to get into some of the other, duration buckets. When we look at 3 to 6 years, it drops down to around 10% of the operations. 6 to 9, it's down to 8% of the operations. And eventually, when it's 9 or more years old, it's down in the 7% of the operations range. So big drastic decrease from the 19% of the operations happening in those, earlier age trucks coming in for service down to, 7% when they're, 9 and more years old.
Right. And I know you're the data guy. I love to speculate, though, because I'm not held to it, though, right? To your point, then you look at those later years, you're getting maybe some second and third life cycles as well, different owners and different focus there, different cost operation structures as well. The other thing, now this is a pet project of mine, because this is one of the things that we identified, I think, early on when we started talking about this, automated manual transmission service, AMTs. We've seen increases, I think, every time we've talked here as we've tracked these quarters. Anything stand out about that to you, or any other codes that are grabbing your attention and you're looking at for next year or next quarter?
Yeah, there were definitely two codes that jumped out at us as very, kind of interesting to see what's happening with them quarter over quarter and year over year. Charging was one of them specifically. The reason that we thought that was a little interesting was it was down quarter over quarter, but still up year over year. So seeing this like opposite directions of, how it was impacting when you look over different time periods. So it's one that we wanted to keep an eye on. We have an hypothesis, and that is, potentially due to like colder weather preparations. And again, like people kind of spending a little bit more time in that space, but it's one that we definitely want to keep an eye on and see if that trend continues. When we look at charging specifically for the last 4 quarters, it was up 30%, then down 14, up 19, now down 12. So again, just trying to, very interesting where it isn't staying steady, doesn't seem to be seasonal, like whether there's some type of preparation happening at different, cadences during the year. It was definitely one that it has caught our attention and we want to keep an eye on. Another one that kind of jumped out at us was fuel systems. For that one specifically, again, most of the increase was over this past quarter. So it could be potentially another like seasonal issue where that increase also happened in Q1, like early in the year. So maybe in that Q4, Q1 period, we see a little bit more of the fuel system related operations happening. Maybe it's related to something around like fuel treatment timing, fuel blends. And again, from like the last 4 quarters perspective, it was up 12%, down 7%, down 2%, and now up 16%. So again, is there something happening in that Q1 beginning of the year, Q4 end of the year cycle where, fuel systems become something that we definitely want to, kind of pay attention to, and folks want to make sure it's working properly before they get into the bulk of the year. So if it is seasonal, and again, trying to kind of see if that, Q1 happens again, we'd expect another increase going into this upcoming Q1.
Yeah, well, and even the way you describe it here, I think the way you're analyzing that is seeing this pinballing of ups and downs, right? That stands out to you. If you think about it from a fleet manager standpoint, say I have 100 trucks or 200 trucks, might be interesting that if I have operations that I'm tracking and I'm seeing that pinballing all over, maybe something for me to keep my eye on as well and dig into a little bit, just because, might take a little bit of investigation there to figure out what that might be. On the last session, one thing we talked about that really stood out to me was tracking the value of best practices, right? How that improves the service operation, how it improves fleet uptime. I know many fleets have access to the service relationship management platform that Decisiv offers, and you guys are tracking service activity. Any update there on the value of best practices and what those top service shops are doing?
Absolutely. Thank you for the ask. We're definitely seeing that, fleets and dealers that are actively engaged on the platform, they're really realizing a lot of value there. Some of the key things that we're focusing on, they're able to see average improvements in the downtime. And some folks have been seeing, again, like an average around 3.3 days improvement of reduced downtime. That provides value to both the fleet as well as the dealer that's servicing the asset. Whether for it's the dealer, they're able to have, more bay availability, more technician availability if they're able to service things faster. For the fleet, that's, creating extra, time for that asset to be on the road, less downtime throughout the course of the year, which means they're able to kind of turn a couple more dollars through that particular asset. And, if we put some numbers to some of that 3.3 days of returned service time, if we assume an average daily fleet revenue per truck of around $1,500 per day, and so far here in 2024, we've had 1.2 million service events through our platform today. We start to get to a real increase in fleet revenue that's equating to over $4.3 billion from those additional days that those assets are active and on the road. So generating huge value to the fleets there, being able to have that truck back to them, not sitting on the side of the road somewhere, not in a shop, not in somebody's yard waiting to be fixed. But when people are leveraging those best practices, they come back out faster. I should add, we've recently introduced a new reporting system that has a direct bearing on enabling service providers to identify bottlenecks in their service workflow. These reports, deliver actionable information that provide a top-down view on service performance at that company or dealer group, also at the location, and even at the service advisor level. The initial reports on its use have been great, with some of the dealers that are leveraging that suite of custom reports, seeing an improvement in the reduction of their days out of service, ranging anywhere from 11 to 24%. So again, just continuing to kind of leverage the platform, the data that exists there. How can we help folks better understand, where is their time spent, where are there opportunities for further efficiency? And when we're able to kind of use this ecosystem, put that information in front of them, then they're able to see like great value in that return to service, and that benefits both them from a dealer perspective as well as their customers that are coming in for service.
Yeah, for sure. I think, from a fleet perspective, I get it. There's a lot of data. You and I are talking a lot about a lot of data here. You mentioned millions of service events already this year. But, visibility, right? Being aware of it, being able to see it. And then I love the point about being able to act on it. I think that's huge. So if fleets keep that in mind, they can make a real big impact with data. And that's the name of the game there.
Absolutely.
Hey, Nick, thanks so much for taking the time. Always great to catch up. Looking forward to tracking some of those trends we talked about into the next quarter report, and we will talk again very soon.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for the time, Jason.